Hello, I'm Azusa.
I'm Alex.
And we're Studio SWINE. SWINE stands for Super Wide Interdisciplinary New Explorers. We're designers and filmmakers. And we both come from different backgrounds of art and architecture, but both studied product design at the Royal College of Art. And we've based our studio on three things that we love. We love to travel and explore new places, new ideas. So for this reason, we've kept our studio quite flexible and nomadic. We're obsessed with materials. We love to research and discover new materials. That's very exciting. We're into sustainability that's exciting and that doesn't compromise on the aesthetics. We started working together 5 years ago, and when we graduated from RCA, we felt that London was very much overcrowded. It's a really fantastic place to be, but we felt that the opportunities were too small and we were quite impatient, so we decided to move to a different country. So we chose São Paulo because it's cheaper than living in London, and we figured that there's going to be a lot of exciting things that's going to be happening in Brazil, such as World Cup, the Olympics. So we applied to lots of grants, residencies. We approached a lot of people in Brazil, but unfortunately, we never heard back from anyone. But when you really believe in an idea, you have to make it happen, no matter what. So 1 month later, we flew to São Paulo with no opportunities, no contacts, and no place to live. And we got there and thought that we should set up something, but we didn't know anyone to even start having meetings. So we ended up staying in the cheapest, smelliest hostel in town. And it was really awful, and we couldn't stand the smell. So we had to stay out as much as possible, and this forced us to start walking around the city every day. And eventually we found this lovely flat on Craigslist that was totally unfurnished. There was no fridge, no cooker, no bed, but it did have 2 swimming pools. So we slept on the floor, ate raw food, and went swimming every day. During the day, we had nothing to do, so we spent every day walking around the city just to get to know the city, which is an odd thing to do because everyone takes a car and streets are not really developed for walking around. It's an enormous city, and when it's not incredibly hot, it's torrential rain. But we walked around every day, no matter the weather, and we started to observe things that was really interesting that was happening on the streets. So we kept a blog called Daily Postcard from Brazil, which we posted daily about the street life in São Paulo and making observations on the streets that made us really understand a lot about the Brazilian outlook and the society. And the street became the source of our inspiration. We became really interested in the concept of vernacular design, which is like an informal design that is a product of region, its culture and resources, and often the design is a direct result of a particular situation that is made locally rather than something mass-produced and ubiquitous. So for instance, vernacular designs are often improvised, meaning that what they make and how they make it is often informed by what is readily available to them. So for instance, this man has converted a bicycle to make a knife sharpener. And another example is that in São Paulo, the buildings owners are responsible for paving the pavement in front of their buildings. So many businesses pave the street with tiles that carry the emblem of their trade. So bakers would have bread patterns, and locksmiths will embed keys in the concrete of the building, of the pavement, so that the fabric of the building is continued into the street. And it's always really interesting for us when the materiality of the street is carried into a city that gives us a sense of place. And we're looking at and archiving lots of street cards and different types of street cards. And it's really exciting to think about these street cards as fragments of mobile trades that can move around and come together to create a mobile city. And these mobile structures made us think a lot about their carnival culture and their moving architecture. And Brazil is quite open and public, there's a lot of socializing that takes place on the streets. So for instance, the one on the right-hand side, right upper hand corner, is a mobile pizza oven. And what we found most interesting were those catadores that go around the city collecting recyclable goods. And because we went out each day and walked around the city, we got to study how they moved around, and we see them at different parts of the city at certain times of the day. And we studied what kind of materials they were collecting, how they were collecting them, and how they were making their carts. And they didn't just work in a fixed location, but they were nomadic, which made us think in order to make work, you don't really need a studio or workshop. And taking this idea forward, we came up with a new model of manufacturing, which is taking things that are readily available on the streets to manufacture things for the streets.
So we thought what materials were free on the streets. So we found a lot of aluminium cans, and we knew it was quite easy to melt aluminium. It's only 650 degrees. So we collected a lot of them around the city. And we designed a mobile furnace that could cast on demand. So we went to a scrapyard and got materials to make this furnace, and we used a kind of old beer barrel, and we didn't have anywhere to weld it, so we went to a nearby bike shop and got it welded. And we needed a fuel to fuel the furnace, so there's a lot of fried food that gets made in Brazil, and so we used the waste vegetable oil. So we could feed that into the furnace. And we needed molds, and cast iron molds are really expensive and inflexible, but Sao Paulo has like the most amount of construction going on in the world. It's incredible how much free sand there is. So we had sand to make sand casts. So we started experimenting. We'd never cast metal before. And we started doing it every day. And it took us a while to kind of get the hang of it and control the temperature and all these kind of things. It makes this massive roaring sound as if it's going to take off. But we kind of carried on. And we'd get these really odd lumps of metal. But gradually we were finding something quite interesting, which is the material was really expressing itself. And normally when you come across aluminium furniture, it's very industrial and ubiquitous. And so we started taking items from the street and casting them into metals. This is a car hubcap, and this is basket. And so we made this collection of stalls for the street markets where we collected the materials. So they're kind of imperfect and different each time, but the idea is the cartmen could make them and supplement their income.
This is what we call EII, which stands for economically important insect. It makes this one of the most luxurious and prized materials in the world. And it created this, the most important route for cultural exchange. Not only it exchanged goods, but ideas, religion, aesthetics. So we wanted to explore the notion of the Silk Road, and we were curious to find the modern day equivalent. This is a hair supermarket in East London. Hair industry is actually a growing trade, and there's a booming industry in wigs and extensions. And we've always read the label 100% human hair from China. And we wanted to trace it back to its root, who's selling the hair, the factories which process it. We did some research and found out that China is actually the largest exporter of human hair and the largest importer of tropical hardwood. Asian hair is the strongest and grows 30% faster than Western hair and over 16 times faster than mahogany. And we love the look of materials like horn and tortoise shell, but they're diminishing resources. And so we wanted to create a material that mimics the looks, but using human hair. We kept on visiting the hair supermarket and continued to experiment and research into the materiality of hair, and created some sunglasses using this material. And 2 years later, we got to go to China to visit the world's biggest human hair market in Shandong province.
So it's this really quite bleak place, and the whole place revolves around the hair industry. So we went to this is the largest hair market in the world. It doesn't look that impressive from outside, but when we went in, it was this big empty hall. We went there quite early, and then it just started filling up with bikers biking straight in, and they had kind of rabbit skins on the front of their bikes over the handles, and then these sacks of hair on the back of their bikes. So it's really quite a Mad Max kind of scene. And we always storyboard the films at the same time as designing their products right from the beginning. So we knew as soon as we saw these guys that we had to start the movie on the road with a bike. And they source their hair from different provinces around China, from women that want to earn extra income, but then increasingly from India, where it's shaved ritually, and the temples collect it and sell it on the international market. We followed where the hair went after the market, and it was the first time it had ever been filmed. So this is the start of it in the factory. And the start of the processing of it. And there's this amazing shift when it becomes, stops being like this kind of repulsive material in a way, to becoming just this really desirable, quite flaxen-haired, kind of like almost like fleece-like material. We decided to make a composite material with it, which is with bioresin, which is a byproduct of the paper industry, to make a kind of mock tortoise shell. So this is like a Ming Dynasty table screen. And we're really inspired by Shanghai Deco. That's where we're living at the time. And it's when the Chinese took this French decorative style and really made it their own. So this is a dressing table that we're making. And it's a kind of crossover of Shanghai Deco and Qing Dynasty. So this would be made in jade originally, this bai, and geometric forms, a set of combs. It's done with, we could cut the different hair colours and interlock them in this kind of marquetry in a vase.
We first heard about the problem of plastic in our oceans in 2010, and the UN actually estimates over 100 million tons to be in our oceans. And with rising plastic production, this figure is set to double in the next decade. And these plastic are gathering in the middle of the ocean, where the current meet and converge, called the gyre, and breaking down the plastic into tiny fragments. We were really interested in the idea of gyre, but it's so far away and the concept was quite abstract. So we first wanted to see the effect of plastic more locally. So we went to a beach in Cornwall called Porthtowan, which is UK's most polluted beach for microplastic. We drove out from London and in a car, and we slept overnight in the car, and when we woke up in the morning we saw this beach, and it's a really beautiful, pristine beach, and we remember feeling quite disappointed. But on a closer inspection, what appeared to be tiny little pebbles that looks like fish eggs were actually pebbles of plastic, and the beach was totally covered with these plastic pellets. So we spent the whole day collecting these plastic pellets and colour sorted them, and we made our own furnace so that we can melt and process these plastics, so we can understand how these materials behaved. We went through a few generations of furnace and we ended up with this one, which can be made for under £10 with the readily available materials that you have in your own kitchen. And we made it open source that anyone can download it online and build one for themselves. We dreamt of going out to the Gyre, but since the project was self-funded, it was quite hard to find the way. So the next best thing was to go out to the sea with the local fishermen and collect plastic while they fished on their boat. And with the plastic we collected, we made a stool with geographical coordinates of where it was made. We wanted to make a stool because traditionally when sailors went to sea, they had a ship's carpenter for repairing the boat, and they'd also turn their skills into making ship stools from driftwood and whale bones. 3 years later, we still hadn't given up the idea of going out to the Gyre, but still had no money, so we ran a Kickstarter campaign and successfully raised enough funds to go out to the North Atlantic Gyre for 8 days. We designed and made the machine which uses sun's energy to melt and extrude plastic. And we built it so that you can flat pack it into the luggage, and also you can stow it in the tiny spaces on the ship. And we headed to the Azores island.
So we're really interested in maritime crafts. It's a much underrated kind of body of crafts that happens all around the world with coastal communities. And the interesting thing about the Azores was that it was a major whaling station until the 1970s. So it really had a lot of scrimshaw, which is the art of engraving on whale's teeth. So the whalers would actually get given the teeth of the whales. That's what they could keep. And there's such awful conditions on board the ship that to keep them from mutinying, they would, when there was no wind and no whales, they'd engrave these teeth. They'd also do needlework. They'd make kind of lovers, valentines, kind of cards out of shells. So they have all these scrimshaw pieces that go up until the 70s. There's some great power suits and things on the engravings. So we went out to sea on the Sea Dragon. It's this amazing 72-foot yacht that's dedicated to scientific research. So there's different marine biologists on board, and we put the solar extruder on the bows of the ship. And it's gimbaled, so it swings with the waves, and it's a really calm bit of ocean anyway, so you kind of set a course and kind of keep on one axis for most of the way, actually. So we'd all take watches. We're on 24-hour watch to make sure we didn't crash into any container ships, and it was our first time that we'd properly been at sea. So we really wanted to kind of create a great way of engaging with what's quite a depressing issue. When we were out in the Gyre, we didn't see kind of a lot of plastic because it's been so broken up by sunlight and the action of the waves that it gets into these tiny pieces. But each time you put a trawl net out, you find that you get quite a lot of this tiny fragments. But it's incredibly difficult to collect, and it made us believe more than ever that the solution to plastic problem is definitely on land. But we kind of collected it and treated it as quite a precious material. So the machine itself is operated with a sailing winch, so you can crank it by hand, and when it's hot enough to melt, you can extrude it. So it's very kind of manual printer. And we could make these basic shapes, and we did 5 different objects inspired by 5 different gyres. So this is the North Atlantic Gyre, inspired by whaling, and so they all have a tag of the ocean that they represent. And for the South Pacific Gyre, we did. We're interested in the gift-giving cultures of the South Pacific Islands, so we made this tortoiseshell. And for the Indian Ocean, The Indian Ocean has the largest amount of container ship traffic in the world, but they also have one of the last uncontacted tribes on the Andaman Islands. And the amazing thing is they're actually, they have kind of Stone Age technology, and yet they have this human, very recent synthetic material arriving on their beaches, which is just a crazy idea. For the North Pacific, it's famous for like crab nets and crab fishing. And so we made this vase based on that with abalone shell as well in it. And for the South Atlantic, it's famous for the kind of passages to the pole. So star maps and things inspired this piece.
So the best thing about travel is when you return home, you get to see your home with a foreigner's eyes. And we've been traveling around the world for around 3 years when we were approached by the Crown Estate for their major development in the St. James's area to design public seating. And we thought we knew London because we've been here for quite a while. For many years, but when you actually dug below the surface, you discover loads of amazing histories and things that never knew that existed. We went into every single shop in St. James's to learn more about the area, and what we noticed that there were lots of companies that were over 300 years old. For example, Lock & Co. Made the tricorn hat that Lord Nelson wore to the Battle of Trafalgar, which is still on display in the store. And John Love made Queen Victoria's shoes, and the area is where Beau Brummel invented the modern suit. And they still make it in the same way as they did hundreds of years ago. So you can really feel the history that's tangible, and we wanted to translate that into making of our benches. And we created 4 different benches based on 4 different crafts. So shirt, shoe, pipe, and tie. For the shirt bench, we went to Tambal and Asa, which is a world-renowned shirt maker who created the shirt for President Reagan and all the James Bonds. And we learned about how they take body measurements and translate that into pattern cutting. And Churchill's shirt pattern is still displayed on the wall of the shop, which inspired one of the bench legs. And the store was fitted with beautiful mahogany and brass interior, so we wanted to take these materials into the benches as well. We asked ourselves, how would a bench look if it was designed and made by a shirt maker, where it starts with a lot of cutting and folding of paper patterns? We took the chevron pattern from the structure of the fabric. So this pattern runs through all 4 benches, which visually unites them, even the designs are quite different. We put the sketches into the computer and turned them into 3D files. And we sourced the wood sustainably from going around salvage yards around the country to get old school desks that were made from tropical hardwoods. St. James's Market used to be a meat market dating back to 1663, and it's where Wall's sausages started. And we discovered that the cowbone, which is a byproduct of the meat industry, was used to make all sorts of products, such as gambling chips for the gentlemen's clubs, knife handles, cane handles, rulers. And it's still used to make Tambal and Asa collar stays. We visited the Smithfield market to get some cow bones from a local butcher and had them sliced into pieces. We cleaned the bones, we dried them and made them into flat pieces. And this material actually really makes a durable material when polished, which can be used as an alternative to ivory. And the bench as a whole has a folded quality like fabric. And we gave it some fabric texture, which we turned into bronze. and inlaid throughout the bench. The bone inlays form the stitch line, and the benches are really full of details, so when you sit on them, there's always new detail to discover.
So for the shoe bench, we went to John Long, and it's world-renowned shoemaker near the palace, and it's held a royal warrant since the Great Exhibition of 1851. And we spent time with the craftsmen to learn about the process of making shoes, and they start by carving a wooden last of your foot. So under the store, there's an archive of thousands of lasts, and they historically have some patrons such as Duke Ellington, Fred Astaire, Frank Sinatra. So it's really incredible place. And this kind of shoe last inspired the feel of our bench, this kind of organic curves and the solidity of it. So we also used the leather patterns to carve